everyone, welcome to Bikini Design Club. On today's tutorial you will be learning how you can convert our bikini pattern 𝗧𝗿𝗍𝗀𝗀 into a dress. The video is a little bit longer than usual because I explain all the details and I even explain the differences between my experiment with this one, which is 100% cotton, and this one, which has stretchy fabric. So the experiment was completely different. The fitting is also different. This one is very tight, despite I didn't include any zipper or any adjustment, so it fits me just over my head and it fits me, but the fit is different. Of course, this one is a bit looser because it has elasticity and this is not, so this is very tight. I achieved the puffiness on the sleeve because I interfaced the sleeve, so I think I got the effect that I wanted for the puff sleeve, despite this is a heavy fabric. But I explain all those details on the tutorial, so just keep up, and if you want, use the timestamps to navigate, and so you go directly to the part of the video that you need. And that's it for today, guys. See you soon. Bye! Hi everyone! So today we will be sewing, just like I was explaining or showing, we will be sewing our dress, and the base for the dress will be our blush top. So the first thing I want to show you is the supplies. Then I will be going over the transformation of the lucky pattern, and then we will go on our sewing machine and start sewing. Let me try and be the shortest possible so that this video will not be too long. So we will have the main fabric for my dress. It's this one. So the other option, the other dress I did had no elasticity whatsoever. It was cotton. And I was able to fit on the dress because we're not going to insert any zipper today. I will be doing a video later on the next week or month, on our next month, on how to install a zipper. But in fact, on my other, this one I'm going to pop up here, I didn't use any zipper. And I'm not going to be using zipper today also, so it's clear. So this is a very easy dress to sew. Of course, I will choose a fabric today which has some elasticity because I think that will make it easier for you to fit the dress on you without needing to insert a zipper. So this fabric is cotton and it has 5% elastane. So it has 5% stretch, 5% elastane, which means that it has some stretch to it. So I will be able to fit it perfectly, I'm sure, because I've tried it with a non-stretchy fabric, so I know that this will work even better. So this is the main fabric I'll be using today. I don't have a lot of fabric, so I'm not sure if I'm going to do all the layers just like I did on the other one, but we will see how much I can do. And even if it's shorter dress, I will still love it, and you will be able to follow the tutorial and do it longer if you want. So this is the main fabric. Then this fabric, I'm going to use this nude color because it's completely neutral under my main fabric, and this is Power Mesh. This is a fabric that I've been using for the Marilyn top or the Rudy top. So every time, or even on the 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀 pattern, when I transformed the 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 pattern, the swimsuit, into a bodysuit, I built a top underneath the main piece, and the top was built in Power Mesh. This gives you a lot of support, so you don't need to wear a bra. So this Power Mesh has elasticity in one direction, and it also has on the other direction, but it's much stiffer. So I'm going to be using the main elasticity horizontally on my body. Okay, so I will cut this with the main stretch horizontally around me. Okay, and so I'll be using this net stretch today. And then I'm going to do something different than I did on the other dress, because this fabric is very soft and it's more heavy. So this means that my puff sleeve is not going to be very puffy like I had on the other one, which I had a cotton fabric that's for itself, it stayed puffy on the top sleeve. So this one is not going to, it's going to fall because it's heavier. So to try to create some texture and some stiffness to the sleeve, I'm gonna be adding this fabric. What's this? Well, I don't know exactly the name in English, but I'm going to explain you what it is and you will find it for sure. This is something that it's quite soft, and it has like a glue on this side. So I'm going to use my iron, and I'm going to iron this fabric on my sleeves, and this is going to fuse on my sleeves, and it's going to give the stiffness that I think it will make the sleeve be a little bit more stiff instead of just dripping with the weight of my fabric. So I'm going to be ironing this to my main fabric, only on the sleeves. If you feel like you don't want to have the sleeves very puffy and very voluminous, you don't need to do this, but today I'm gonna try. I didn't do this on my previous dress, so this is an attempt and an experiment I'm gonna do today with you using this fabric. And then for, you know that the Lucky Top and the Bora pattern, they have the gather sleeve on the lower part. So I was thinking I'm going to use braided elastic inside my sleeve. And then I have here 3 options that I want to share with you. So this one is a satin ribbon, and it's very soft, and I thought about using it to create my channel just because this is going to be in contact with my arm and I want it to be soft. But then I realized that I had this one. This is fold over. This is a fold over strip. You see here that it's folded, right? And this has a texture, a very soft texture. This is cotton and it's very soft. So I believe I'm going to be using this instead of the ribbon. But if I didn't have this one, I had this one. And I think you can see on the video that the texture for this one is completely different. This is much stiffer. I don't know, I don't think it will be so comfortable against my skin. So that's why I planned to use the ribbon, because I didn't remember that I had a little bit of this one left over from another project. So I'm going to be using this one, but if you don't have and you only have a stiff one, you can also use a ribbon or even a piece of your own fabric to create the channel. And that's it. Now let's go through our let's move the fabrics aside and let's talk about the transformation of our lucky pattern. So grab your lucky pattern on your size and let's start. So this is the main lucky pattern, the front and the back. And if you followed that tutorial, you know that we will sew here in the middle, but for the dress we don't want a seam in the middle, so we will be changing this a little bit. So this is my original pattern, the lucky pattern, and then I changed it a little bit to make the dress. And this is the dress pattern. So what do we need to do? Well, if I overlap them, you can see that they have the same under the bust, the same darts, the same side, everything is the same. The only difference is that I made the neckline higher, so I used a higher neckline, and I remade the curve here. And this is just because on a dress I don't want a lot of cleavage like I would on my top, on my bikini top, and that's why I closed the cleavage a little bit. If you want to know exactly how much, and you can see that I kept the seam allowance marked on my pattern, but we are actually going to use the limits of this as a fold line, not as a seam allowance, okay? But never mind, keep the same size from your main pattern, just extends. This was the option I'm going to tell you. This is a size 10, and I had 3 centimeters on this line here. So on my main fabric, on my main top, I had 3 centimeters, and now instead of 3 centimeters, if I see from here to here, I now have 5.9, so 6 centimeters. And then from here I did a curve that went until it reached the top of my sleeve, and then of course I made the seam allowance. So regarding the amount of difference that we have here, I can tell you that here it's 1.2 centimeters, so here it's 1.2, I think it's the maximum. Here it's also 1.3, and then here 1.1, and then it's slowly 1 here. So you can do a slightly curved line from the edge of the top of your shoulder, and you come down here until you reach the edge of the 6 centimeter dot that we have just marked. Okay, and here you have 1.2, which is more or less, if we do here like on the bust point of the darts, if we do an horizontal line, I can tell you that here in this area I have also 1.2 centimeters from the edge of my main lucky top. See that this is including the seam allowance, so 1.2 from the edge of the cutted pattern until the line of my new pattern for the dress. Okay, and then of course you add the seam allowance from here to the edge. Okay, and the same here, and so you can see that more or less we have 1.2, 1.3, and then we start reducing the amount of distance that we have increased. I'm gonna tell you, I have this one here, it's 8 centimeters from the bust, from where the dart is, so from here to here you have 8 centimeters. Okay, so 8 centimeters as a reference, and then from the edge of the cutted pattern 1.5 centimeter, 1.1 centimeter until your new edge of the pattern. And this one on 1.3, I can tell you it's 5 centimeters here, so from this to here you have 5 centimeters. Okay, and so I think with this description you can already remake your own line, and you have your front ready. And when you have your front, don't forget to have the notch. You can use the same notch that you had on the lucky. And here, instead of worrying about this being a center seam, I actually use this line as a fold line. Okay, so use the same cut, you had the cutted pattern, use that same amount of that line vertically, and that's where we are going to have the fold. Okay, so we have the front exactly like the lucky top, but it's a little bit more covered here on the front. For the back, cut the main fabric using the same pattern piece that we used for the back lucky top, and on the lining sides we have to remove a little bit from the center back, so just remove the seam allowance and cut using that new measurement. Then for the sleeves, I think I did a little bit of inventing. I'm gonna show you. You can do the sleeve just like on the lucky top, but I actually changed it a little bit. So let's see what I did. This is something hard for you to improvise because of the curves and everything. So the best option is for you to sew using the lucky sleeve, because you have the puffiness, you have the notch marked, so you don't really need to invent a lot. But just to share with you that I've lowered the size of the sleeve, so it's not so big as the sleeve that I did for the lucky. So I lowered the center of the sleeve, the center of the shoulder. As you can see, I lowered it a lot. Let me check. 9 centimeters, so I really lowered the center here. And then I wanted more gather than on the lucky top, so I extended the lower part of the sleeve. So as you can see, my sleeve is going to be completely different from this one, but you can actually use this one if you want and make it a little bit shorter, and it will look amazing. Well, so now and today I'm gonna be using this one just to show you the final result if we use this one. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is, I don't want my sleeve to be so big, so I'm gonna try and reduce 5 centimeters from my sleeve. This is a size 10, remember. So I'm gonna reduce, I'm drawing a line 5 centimeters parallel to my previous pattern line. So from here to here I marked 5 centimeters, and I'm gonna cut with the seam allowance down here and this is going to be my sleeve for the dress, okay? And you have the notch already, and you have the grain line, so everything is okay, and we can go ahead and use this sleeve as the pattern. So the next thing we are going to do is cut the pattern. The things for the pattern, for the cutting of the fabrics is that for the sleeve we are going to cut the main fabric, and also on the fabric that I told you to make my sleeve a little bit stiffer. So I'm going to be cutting on this one and also on the main fabric. For the front and back, I'm going to be cutting the main fabric but also my power net. And then we will cut tiers. So for the tiers, the dress has 3 tiers. You can make this a top and you can do only 1 tier, or you can do longer with 4 tiers. So it's up to you how many tiers you want, and it's also up to you to decide the height of each tier. I'm going to do an example today, and I'm going to tell you how to calculate the length of the tier, but it's up to you, and you can completely improvise and make this your own with your own measurements. So what I did is I checked my under the bust measurements of the pattern, and then I multiplied by 1.5 because I want to have the rush effect, and I want to be able to have not a plain fabric. I want to have the rush effect. So I multiplied by 1.5 and I got 108 centimeters. And then the height of my first tier, I decided that I wanted 23 centimeters. But as I told you, this is completely up to you. Then for the second tier, I made 162 centimeters and the height 26. And then the third tier, 243 per 32 centimeters. And I had a fourth tier, but I didn't do it, and it was even with a this means that you need a lot of fabric, and my dress would be too long, so that's why I didn't use this one. But you can do as many tiers as you want. You decide the height of your tier, and regarding this, you can also decide the amount of rush that you want. So if you want more rush than I had here, I had multiplied by 1.5. You can actually multiply this by 2 if you want, so you will have more fabric and you will have more rush when you connect your first tier to your main fabric. So it's up to you, okay? This is just a reference, and it's just me sharing how I did it. So my first tier is 108 centimeters, then 162, then 243, okay? And I'm gonna see if I have enough fabric, because my fabric is 1.5 centimeters, of course, like most fabrics. And this means that for this tier, for instance, I have to sew 2 tiers together before I consider it a final tier, okay? Because of course my fabric doesn't have 243, right? And also here on 162, my fabric is 1.5, as I told you. So here I can decide if I want to make an amendment and I want to have 1.5 and then 12 centimeters, or if I want to divide this in 2 and create side seam allowances. So this one we need to decide what we want to do. Or actually we can also reduce this to 150 centimeters, and we can use the total length of the fabric, not length, the other, you know, and we don't need to do any side seams. But since for this layer we will mandatorily need to make side seams, probably you can also go ahead and do side seams here, and it will be no problem. So let's go ahead and start preparing the top, because that's the hardest part, and I will be showing you how to do it. So for now, just cut the fabrics, and I will be back here to explain you what to do next. So I only have 1.2 meters of this fabric, so it's not a lot. Probably I'm gonna do a top instead of a dress, but as I explained, it's the same, because you just need to continuing adding layers, and I will explain you how to add the first and the second layer. So it will be easy if you want to have the longer dress, but today I think I'm gonna choose the shorter option, because my fabric will not be enough for sure for the longer dress. which is not a problem because I really love the fabric and I think it's going to be pretty nice as a top also. So I'm gonna make sure that I identify which fabrics this is, because I know that I told you I don't know the name, but I will search and I will include it on the video, so it's better for you. And something that I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the seam allowance here, probably 2 centimeters. I'm gonna remove 2 centimeters because I'm going to place the channel on the edge of the fabric, and I don't want the fabric on the area where I'm gonna create the channel to be stiff, so I don't think I need this until the edge of my fabric. But I'm not sure yet, because this is so soft that I need to think about it. If I cut, I will tell you. So now, as I told you, we are just going to go ahead and cut the sleeves and the front and the back. So go ahead, place just like we did for the other pieces, just place your pattern piece on top of your fabric. Don't forget that the greatest stretch of your fabric is horizontal, so it's around you and not vertically. Okay, that's important. And then just place your fabric and cut it. Something that I want to make sure that I do is I want to align my side seam from the back with the front. So because this is striped, so I want to make sure that the stripe continues from the front to the back. So I'm gonna try and when I cut the back, I'm gonna try to align exactly where I'm doing now, so that I will have matching front and back. So if I could, I would do this on the white. Well, this is irregular, so no, it's okay. It will be on the blue. Okay, so I've placed my pattern piece. Now let's just cut the fabric, front, back, sleeve, and I will be back. I will stop the video now, so don't worry. And you can always follow the timestamps to jump and navigate much easier on the video. So if you want, please use the timestamps. So I'm gonna cut the fabrics and then I'm gonna come back and film more. So now we are gonna prepare this fabric to be sewn on our main fabric. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the seam allowance from the pattern, because it's easier this way. If I wasn't filming, I would improvise this. But since I'm filming, I'm gonna tell you how you should do it the proper way. So I'm gonna remove the seam allowances here. And also here. And now I'm gonna place this. I have the 2 pieces of fabric here folded in half, so it's easier for me. And now you just place the fold on the fold, and as you can see, we have the seam allowance here. So I'm gonna cut the seam allowance from this fabric, and then I'm gonna grab my iron and my ironing boards, and I'm going to iron this fabric to my main fabric to start preparing my sleeves. Then we have to mark the notches again, but we will just need to have the notches on our main fabric, not here, so it's okay. Don't forget that on the main fabric you need to have the notches and also the middle of your sleeve marked, which is here. I assume that you have all seen the video for the lucky top, so you also have a way. On that video I explain in detail how you can sew the sleeves, but I'm gonna show you again here. But if you want, you also have that video available. So one at a time. They are symmetrical, so you don't need to worry. Lay it flat on your ironing boards. This is a very hard fabric to work. I can say that probably for me it's even worse than, it's harder to sew than on lycra for the swimwear, because you have the tendency to stretch, and I'm not so used to sewing clothes. I'm more used to sewing bikinis, but well, you are experiencing this firsthand with me, so let's see how this turns. So I'm gonna place this on top here with the glue turned, of course, to my fabric. And now when I iron this will stay together, bonded with the glue, and with my iron I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna get my iron and I'm gonna press this carefully, and this is going to be interface. I remembered, this is the interface. Yeah, fusible interface. And then I'm gonna also do the same for the other one, okay? So let's do it. This fabric also has something that it's hard for me, is that it curls on the edge. Once it's cutted, it's naturally curls, so it's sometimes hard to lay it completely flat. But of course, if you choose another fabric, it's easier to sew this one. You probably saw the pictures of my first dress, which is also striped blue and white, but the fabric was completely non-stretch, so it was cotton. And I also improvised with that one, and I was not sure if it was going to work because you don't have adjustment, and so under the bust for the dress it had to fit. So I put it from my head. I dressed the fabric from my head, so it had to fit and it had to come through a lot of things before it sits in place, but it actually fits even without stretchiness of the fabric and even without the zipper. So this one, I'm sure that being a little bit stretchy, I'm sure that it's going to fit even better. But as I told you, at least for me, size 10, the other fabric, 100% cotton without any stretch, it still worked, and I didn't need to apply any zipper. But as I also told you, in the near future I will be filming this, and I will be doing another one but with a zipper. So if you want to add the zipper, you will also have that option very soon, okay? Now let's grab our front top, and we can also grab the power mesh, and we can prepare the darts. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, and that's something that you already know how to do it because it's the same for the Lucky, for the 𝗱𝗿𝗀 pattern. So just pin right sides facing together, go to your straight stitch, and you already know how I do my darts. I start from the edge out inwards, and then I do this is slightly rounded, so I follow the curve with the seam allowance. And when I reach the fold of the fabric here, I keep on sewing 2 or 3 stitches more, and then I leave my tails and I tie 2 knots by hand, and then I cut the excess thread. And that's how I finish my dart on the bust point to make sure that the finish is perfect. And then of course I trim a little bit more the folded fabric, I cut it, and my darts will be finished. So I have prepared this. I'm going to prepare also the same on this one. And then the next step will be for us to connect the front with the back. So I will be back on the table. For now, you can go ahead and sew the darts. This has the wrong side and the right side, and the right side is the one that it's softer, so it's going to be against my skin. So I make sure that I pin this with right sides facing together, so with my softer sides facing inwards, because it's my main. It's going to be in contact with my body, so I don't want the seam to be there. Okay, so just do the same, and we'll be back. We now have here the front with the dart already sewn. As I told you, I'm gonna grab a small scissor and I'm gonna trim just a little bit here. And I will have my 2 fronts ready, and I'm gonna set them aside because now I want to go ahead and start preparing my sleeves. So grab your sleeves, and we are going to do just like we did on the Lucky top. We are already going to sew the channel, and we are also going to do a basting stitch from the notch until the other notch, just around here, near the edge of the fabric, do a very long stitch or a basting stitch from one edge to the other. Leave the tail so that we can then, in the end, we will pull and create the puffiness, the puff heads for the sleeve, okay? And that's for the top of the sleeves. For the lower part here, as we have talked, we are going to be sewing a channel on the lower parts. You can do it in the middle of the sleeve and do a seam here, but I prefer to do this on the lower parts of my sleeve, so on the edge of my sleeve. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be sewing this fold over, which is folded like so. This is not elastic, this is very soft, it's cotton. And we are going to sew these two together. So let's explain in detail how to do that. Place right sides facing together of your strap, fold over strap, and your main fabric. Align the strap with the edge of the sleeve and pin them together. As you can see, I'm opening the fold over strap as I go along, and the fold of the strap is on the edge of my fabric. And now when we sew on our sewing machine, on our straight stitch machine, we will use a straight stitch and we will sew very near the edge of the fold, of the lower fold, but in a way that we will secure the folded strap with the main fabric. So preparing our sleeve, we sewed the fold over right sides facing together, so right side with the right side. We opened the fold and we sewed on the edge of the fold, but making sure that we were a little bit inwards so that we were securing the two fabrics together. And our fold over is completely secured on the main fabric with a stitch, straight stitch all along here. I also did the basting stitch here, so using a very long stitch, I started on one side on the notch and until I reached the other, and then I left the tail. This will be for us to pull and create the puffiness a little bit later on our tutorial. And now on the channel here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this like so. I'm going to grab my iron, and just to make it easier for me, we can iron this in place because it's easier when you are sewing to make sure that this is in place if it's iron. If you don't want to use your iron, just pin like I'm doing here. So fold this inside like so. And we pin. And we will sew a straight stitch very near the edge of our sleeve. So on the lower edge here, a straight stitch from one edge to the other, and this will make sure that our fold over will be hidden inside, and we are almost over with creating the channel for the elastic. So if you want, iron here just to lay it a little bit flatter than it is, but depends on your fabric. And now I'm going to do a stitch all along from the beginning here until the end and very near the edge. And I will repeat the process for the other sleeve, and our two sleeves are set aside on the next step. So as you saw, we did the first stitch, we folded, we pinned, and we did this stitch here on the edge. And so on the back you can see that we now have here, this will be the channel where you will have your elastic. So we can go ahead and sew another line here, so another stitch, creating the channel so that then we can go with the elastic. The width of the width of the channel depends on your elastic and also on your taste. So I'm going to go ahead and do mine. I'm going to show you. because I will be using a small accessory that I have to make sure that my stitch is completely parallel to the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to show you a little trick that I will be using to sew the second line here. And I decided to use the blue threads on the top, and I kept my white underneath. So I will do the same here. So white for this side, and I will keep my blue on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for both sleeves. So this is the accessory I was telling you about, and this allows me to align my fabric along this side here, and to make sure that my my thread will be parallel to the edge of the fabric. So what I do is I grab my fabric, I place the fabric where I want my seam to be, my line to be sewn. For instance here, I think it's enough. Lower my needle, and then I'm gonna place this. Whoa. It's a magnet, so I'm gonna place it here, and this will make sure that my fabric is going to be fed aligned with this magnet, and my line is going to be parallel to the edge of the fabric the entire time. So I'm gonna introduce something new that I didn't discuss in the beginning, which is there's a tape called Wonder Tape that it's also fusible, and I have here the bias tape, two of them actually. This one a little bit wider, and this one a little bit wider, and this one a little bit less wide. This one doesn't have any stitch here, and this one doesn't have any stitch, and this one has, as you can see. And this prevents the edges from stretching. And since I'm using a stretchy fabric, this is something very useful because it can prevent you from stretching the fabric and then deforming the fabric and the shape. So if you have this in hand, and if you feel like it's more comfortable for you to use, this would be a nice option for us to use, for instance, on our under the arm seam, to make sure that it stays perfectly in place. So imagine that I'm gonna use it, and I'm gonna do it just for you. I already have here my two straps, and I'm two tiers, and I was thinking that probably I will use one of these to the lower edge. So the lower edge of my dress or my shirt will, for the main seam, for the lower seam, I'm not sure, but probably I will use this one. But here in this under the arm area, this is fusible, so you just need to place your fabric on the wrong sides. And then this has a side that it is a little bit bigger than the other one, so the bigger one goes to the edge of the fabric. And this is easy for you to do with your iron and give the shape and curve and iron at the same time. So I'm gonna grab my iron and I'm gonna apply this here, but I'm also going to go ahead and apply this on the back. So before we sew this, we fuse this in place, let's go ahead and connect the front with the back. So place the front with the back, right sides facing together, align the shoulders. It's curling, as I told you, this fabric loves, after it's cut it loves to curl. So I'm gonna place two pins here, and I'm gonna sew one on my overlock or serger. It's the same, and depending on the country you are, of course. And then I'm gonna come back on the table, and I'm gonna do what I was telling you. I'm gonna fuse this with my iron under the arm from the front to the back, a continuous fusible line with this to help me stabilize that seam. Okay, let's just go ahead and do that now. You can also do that on the neckline, but I'm not going to, and I will show you how we are going to prepare the neckline in a few moments. And since we are doing this, we can already go ahead and do the same for our power mesh, for our lining. So we can already place right sides facing together, also align the shoulders, pin and sew them. and I'll be back on the table in a few seconds. So I've sewn the shoulders and I'm back on the table. I have here my bias tape and I'm going to align, as I told you, here on the edge of the fabric. And while you tilt your bias tape to do the curve, you go with your iron on the edge, and as you can see, we did the curve, so this is stabilized. Now very carefully, not to stretch, I'm gonna place it here like so. I'm gonna put this seam towards the back, align this, fuse. This is not a swimsuit or a top, a bikini top, so we will not be hiding all the seams and worrying about that, because when I sew clothes, which is not very often, but when I do, and if you look at your clothes that you have on your wardrobe, you will see that most of them, you have a lot of seams visible and in contact with you, so that's something that we will not be so worried while we do this, but we still want this to be nicely finished. So this is much better now, because this means that this edge here is not going to overstretch, and when I sew the sleeve here, I will not be able to stretch this and deform the shape that we had. And now we just need to do the same for the other sides. Again, this for the back. This is optional, as I told you, and this also depends, because probably you are doing this on a non-stretchy fabric. So if you are doing this in cotton, like I did the first dress, you know, don't need to do this. Your fabric is not going to stretch, so it's not going to be deformed. And even if I didn't have the bias tape, I could still do the dress or the shirt or the top without this, but I think it's more perfect like so. So I'm going to do it today, and it's good because this way you will, if this is something new for you, it's something that we will learn together. So I hope you like it. So I'm also going to use a little bit here on my neckline, just on the front, because I don't think I have enough to go all around my neckline. So I'm just going to use on the front part near the V shape of the front. At least there I know that I will prevent the shape from being ruined. Unfortunately, I don't think I have enough to go all around, so if you do, please do so. And so the little bits that I have left, I will use to stabilize the rounded back. I'm sure that this is going to help me a lot when I'm on my sewing machine, not to change the original shape of the pattern. So I'm quite happy to try this new thing for me. I'm very, very happy and excited to try this, and I really hope it helps. So I think it does. I'm ironing with my left hand. What am I doing? Let me come back to my right hand. So once this is stabilized, I'm gonna set it aside and I'm gonna prepare my 2 tiers. As I told you, you can have more than 2 tiers, but today I'm gonna do this with 2 tiers, and this is enough for you to know. If you want to add more, you can add more. So my first tier will have 23 centimeters high, and it has the entire length of my fabric, so it's 1 meter and 50 centimeters, 150. And for this one, I'm also going to be doing it with 150, because I would need to do amendments on the sides if I want to make it longer, and I don't have enough fabric. But if you want to, just cut the same height and combine the two pieces on the sides, and you will have a longer tier. What I'm going to do on the lower tier, so this is the first tier, the top will be on the top, then this one, and then this one. And what I'm going to do on my second tier is on the lower part where I will have my main seam. I will use this stabilizer fusible, and I will do this. I will fuse this with my iron on the lower seam from the entire tier. And then I will go to my straight stitch machine and I will do a basting stitch from one edge to the other, so that we can then create the rush effect that we need. And lastly, we will combine right sides facing together on the side seam, and we will sew with our serger. Okay, so this is the 3 things I'm going to do with this tier. And I can also go ahead and on this one, I can also go ahead and do a basting stitch on the top and a basting stitch on the lower parts, because we are gonna, this is the first one, so we are gonna rush on the top and we are gonna rush on the bottom. So we will be doing basting stitch on both sides and also sewing the side with our overlock. And this one, I'm not gonna use the fusible stabilizer, I'm just going to use it on my lower seam of the second tier. So let's go ahead and do that. For now, I'm gonna iron this, and then I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and do exactly what I've just told you. We now have our first and second tiers ready. I've sewn the side with the overlock as I told you, and I've done a basting stitch on both sides of the first tier so that we can create the rush in a few seconds. And for this one, I have overlocked the lower seam, the one where we applied the stabilizer, and on the upper seam we did a basting stitch just like I told you before, so that we can create the rush effect a little bit later. So let's finish our seam, the lower seam of our dress. I'm gonna fold the fabric just enough for my thread from the overlock to be on the wrong side. I'm gonna iron to make it easier, but if you don't iron, it's fine anyway, because this is stabilized and it will not stretch when you go to the sewing machine. And once this is more or less secure, I just give a little bit of iron, and then I go to my straight stitch machine, and very near the fold of the fabric, so not touching the overlock threads, very near the edge of the fold, I will do a straight stitch, and that will be my final seam allowance on the lower part of my dress. Let me show you, before we move on, another dress that I've been sewing and it's not finished. This is the lower seam and it's not finished, as you can see, and it was exactly like we have just sewn, but then I cut it very near the thread, that the line that we have just sewn. I cut it the seam allowance, the threads from the overlock, and then I'm going to show you on the same dress how I did after this step. I just folded this edge of the fabric very slightly to the inside, and I gave another straight stitch, and the seam
is perfect. You can see here on the sleeve, this is like a flounce sleeve, as you can see, and you can see a small stitch here on the edge. And if you look on the inside, you have a slightly folded fabric there. Well, that's the finished seam allowance. So if we want, we can do this. But for now, on our dress today, I'm going to leave the overlock thread there and only one stitch. But it's up to you if you want to do like I did here, or if you want to leave it like I'm leaving it today. In this case, I'm just going to give one fold. I'm going to sew the straight stitch and I'm going to leave the seam allowance with the overlock threads included. So I'm not going to cut and fold again.
So now let's do the fun part. And we have here our main piece, right? So I'm gonna set that aside and I'm gonna grab this one. And we are going to remove seam allowance from the neckline front and also from the back. So to do that, and to make it easier for us to do that, I'm gonna fold this in half, like so. And so you have here the front and here the back. And you can do this without a lot of, I think I can, and I think you can also. So pin the fabrics together just to make sure that they don't slide, okay? And to make it easier for you, because we are gonna remove the seam allowance from the neckline and from the back. And why are we going to do that? So let me explain. We are going to sew them together, this one and the main one, and we are then going to sew, we are then going to make another stitch. So we will not have any seam visible on the neckline front and back. And to do that, and for us not to have excess fabric on the insides, we need to remove the seam allowance, because we will not need that extra fabric. So I'm gonna just go ahead and remove more or less 5-6 millimeters from the fabric. I do this by the eye, so I do not measure, but if you feel more comfortable, grab your pattern piece, cut the seam allowance, place on top and cut, okay? I'm just going to go and cut without doing that, but if you feel more comfortable, please go ahead and cut the paper pattern piece. I'm just going to cut like you are watching, improvising, because I've done this before, even on bikinis. If you have seen the tutorials, you know that I do this very often lately, so I'm a bit used to do it, and I really don't feel like I need to go and cut the pattern, the paper pattern piece. And once this is done, we will just need to, okay, so this is done. So now we are going to place right sides facing together of our lining, our power mesh, and our main fabric. Let me just clean my table a little bit because I hate the mess. Okay, so right sides facing together on the table. Like so, and we are going to pin the neckline, the area where we just cut the seam allowance, that's where we are going to pin. So if you align this here, and I'm gonna align on the shoulder seam, you can perfectly see that we now have less power mesh than the main fabric, precisely because we removed the seam allowance on this side. But we will still align the edges and sew these two together on our overlock before we do the understitch. And don't worry, because once this is done and we reverse and we continue our procedures, you will see that removing this piece of fabric was just what you needed for you not to have excess fabric on your dress or blouse if you are going to do a blouse. So pin everything and then overlock everything around. And I did all this without the lights on, but I hope you were able to see it. I'm sorry. Now I have the light on, so I know you can see much better than before. I'm sorry for that. I had a small break for lunch, and then I completely forgot turning the lights on. Sometimes I stretch the fabric just a little bit, just to align them. But since I have applied the fusible tape, you know that I'm not able to stretch my main fabric, which is actually good, but at the same time it's not the easiest way, but well, it will work. So I'm back on the table. I want to show you something, because I'm gonna edit the video so that you don't do the same mistake that I did. But let me show you anyway, so that you know that it happened to me, despite I am actually going to edit the beginning of the video so you don't have the same mistake. So my back piece, we actually used the same back piece as the top, and we used this as a fold line for the main and for the lining. And what I would advise here is for you to use the same piece for exactly the same pattern piece for the main fabric, but when you cut the lining, the power mesh, remove the vertical seam allowance here, and then you cut the power mesh, because I actually saw that I had excess fabric here in the middle, and if I had removed the seam allowance, I wouldn't have excess fabric. So I'm gonna edit the video so that you know in the beginning that you're gonna cut the back like so, because what happened to me is that I had excess fabric on the back lining and I decided to sew it anyway. I did well, something that I shouldn't do, this and I sewed it anyway. Well, I can remove this. It's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna remove this and I'm gonna create a center back seam allowance here. You will not have that center seam allowance on your version because I'm gonna correct the video, but I'm gonna have a center back seam allowance because I'm gonna open this and I'm going to remove a little bit of fabric here, the seam allowances from both sides, and then I'm gonna sew again. But if you have done it like I'm gonna explain in the beginning of the video, this didn't happen to you, so no problem. So now the next step for you, I'm gonna do this, but the next step you can already go ahead and do is with the seam allowance facing the lining. So you just have the seam allowance here and you do this with your lining. You actually can see the seam allowance here. So you're gonna do a stitch securing the lining to the seam all along the neckline, front and back. This is another stitch that will make sure that your lining will not be visible on the main sides. It will be hidden, it will be like so, so it will be beautiful and you will not have any seam on your neckline. And as I'm going to show you, you can also see once you fold this that you now don't have excess fabric on the insides of your top. So that's why we removed the seam allowance from the neckline, remember, for this fabric, that's why. Okay, but now I'm gonna correct this, then I'm gonna do the understitch like I just told you, and then I'll be back on the table and we will move forward. As you can see, if I take this small bit from the lining, it will then be completely matching. So I'm gonna just fix this, but it's good for you to know that this happened, so, and I had to correct it just in case you were wondering in the beginning why the lining is shorter. So that's it. Okay, so I've done the understitch and I did the understitch with a zigzag. So as you can see, it's made on the side of my lining and it has stabilized my seam to the side of my lining, so it's not going to be visible when the dress is ready. So don't forget to use a zigzag. Okay, this is blue and white because I have blue on top and then white on the bottom, and that's why this looks a bit strange, but well, it's fine. It does the work, and it's not going to be seen, so it's fine. So now I'm going to open this, and we are going to sew the sleeves, but only to this fabric, okay, to the main fabric. So I'm going to open my fabric like so. I'm going to grab one of my sleeves. I'm going to make sure that I have my notches marked, which I have. Here I can see it, so I'm going to see if I can do it. Don't forget that you have removed the seam allowance, so here is my center. You can also find the center just by folding the fabric in two, and you will have your center. Okay, so now I have my center, and I have the tails from the stitch that I've done before. Remember the basting stitch. So now you just pull one of the tails and we will do something very interesting. So align the center with the center, right sides facing together in this position, and pin. Now grab a pin, place the edge of the fabric of the sleeve like so, align it also, and pin. Now do exactly the same on the other edge. This is one of the interesting parts because you are sewing opposite curves, so this may seem hard when you are a beginner, but I hope at this point that none of you are beginners anymore. But even if you are, this is not that hard. It looks harder than it is. And now I'm gonna place this notch with the notch on my fabric, which is here, and I'm gonna pin on the notch, and I'm gonna pin another. I'm gonna place another pin here, and I'm gonna do the same on this side. And another one in the middle here. And now I need to use the tails to pull the fabric on each side until I have the same amount of fabric on my sleeve that I have on my main piece, and then I will be able to sew them together. You can already see that this fabric that the interface that we ironed is giving texture and volume and puffiness, so it's exactly what I wanted. So you distribute the rush around this effect around the area according to your preference. This is not something like mathematical, okay? So it's completely up to you to distribute on whatever way you feel like you like it, okay? You just need to make sure that you have the amount of fabric distributed, so have the fabric of the sleeve matching the amount of fabric on your main piece. Pin in place. Do the same on this side, so I've already done half. And then instead of going to the overlock, I'm first going to do a zigzag stitch all around here, securing the two layers together, and so the sleeve to the main piece. The zigzag will be near the edge, so it will not go a lot inwards the fabric, so it's on the edge of the fabric. I'm going to do the zigzag, and then I will repeat the entire process for the other sleeve, of course, and we'll be here again on the table, on the cutting table, to tell you the next steps, because it's getting the final shape. And I really like it. I really like the fusible interfacing that we placed on the sleeve. I think it's going to give the exact amount of puffiness that I was imagining. So I think I'm gonna like this a lot. It's very different from the other one. You saw already images, but I'm gonna pop up images so you can compare. It's already very different. And as I told you, the other one is 100% cotton and this is 5% elastane, so the fabrics are quite different. So now zigzag, do the same on the other and be back. We have now sewn both sleeves with the zigzag that I've told you. Okay, so we have the sleeves attached to the main fabric with our zigzag. We can pull the basting stitch that we have done before. We can pull the thread if we want, or we can leave it there. It's the same, it's no problem. Now we want to hide this seam, and we have done this already in live, and I have some tutorials for the bikinis where you have a ways to hide that seam. Actually, on a piece of cloth, it's not that important to hide the seam because really this is going to be fine, but I'm gonna still hide it today. So if we reverse all this to the main side, just to explain you what to do next, like so. So one of the things we can go ahead and do is decide the length of our elastic. Okay, you can see the puffiness here because of the fusible interfacing that we placed. So you can already see, otherwise it would be flat, but it's quite puffy, so I really like it. But sorry, I was distracted. So now I want to tell you about the gather on the lower part here. So grab your elastic and find more or less the size that you want without making too much pressure on your arm. So you can measure your arm and decide which tension you want to give to your elastic, but make sure it's not too tight or it will be very uncomfortable. So I really prefer it to be a little bit looser than too tight. So I'm going to measure myself. I'm going to give 1 centimeter seam allowance each side, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces of elastic to place on the gather on the lower part of the sleeve. So I have 2 pieces of elastic. Mine, they have 28 centimeters total, and I'm going to have 1 centimeter seam allowance on each side. So this is the exact measurement for me and for me to stay comfortable. So this is the measurement that I'm going to be using today. And something we can already go ahead and do is with the loop turner that you use to reverse your straps on the bikinis, you go from one edge to the other and you pull the elastic until you leave that edge there, and you can sew with a straight stitch on the edge just to secure the elastic there. Okay, and then we will pull the elastic until we reach the other edge, and we will also sew to secure on the other side. Okay, and that's something we can do already if you want. I'm gonna do it in a bit, but that's something we can already do. Now we are gonna also hide the seams on our shoulder. So before we sew the layers and everything, we are gonna do this. So how do we do that? What we want is, when we have our sleeve like so, we want our seam to be inside here, right? So what I do is I align this here, and then I see, oh, okay, I want to hide, so I have to move this to the other side, and I do like this. And then I start sewing this very slowly with my zigzag until I have secured the lining to the main piece. So first I place 1 or 2 pins in the beginning here. And I'm gonna do this before I secure the elastic, but let me show you again because I'm not sure that you have seen what I'm doing. So we are like this, right? And we have, if we open this here, this will be here, right? But you want this to be facing that side so that the sides, so that the seam is hidden. So if I sew this directly here, the seam will be visible, which is also an option. If the next step is too hard for you, just sew this 2 fabrics together, this one to the seam, to the piece of seam you have here, and it's done. If not, we will turn this fabric to this side and align it here on the edge. I'm gonna pin on the edge here, And near the edge again with a zigzag, I'm again going to secure the lining to my main pieces. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to do this slowly, and I'm going to pull the fabrics and placing them together as I go along. So it's not possible to pin everything now. You will go and do this as you sew. It will be easier for you to grab the fabrics and place them together, okay? It's not possible to place them all together now and pin everything in advance. So you can pin 2 or 3 pins, and then the rest you will do on your sewing machine when you sew along. And we will repeat the process to the other side. And this will enable us to have the seam on the shoulder area hidden. So I'm going to sew this and with a zigzag again, and I'll be back again on the table. So one side is done, and now I just need to do the other one. So if you pull the sleeve out, it was harder because of the puffiness, because of the interfacing. It was a little bit harder, and you can see here, but well, I will iron this and it will be perfect once it's finished. And look the inside. Okay. Of course, I have here the lining, and you can see where I have used my interfacing, and you can see it here. I should have left it a little bit longer, or I could also have, after I did a zigzag, once this is on the wrong side, right, like so, I actually should do a straight stitch 1 centimeter or 8 millimeters from the edge, securing the entire seam. And that's what I'm going to do to make. I know that we have done 2 times zigzag, so this is quite secure at this point, but nevertheless it's more perfect if we do a straight stitch with the same distance all along our seam. So that's what I'm going to do before I consider this finished, okay? And then I'm going to repeat the process for the other sleeve, so that we will have our sleeves, our seam on the shoulders ready. Well, I've done the sleeves, both of them, just like I told you. And now I'm gonna place with my loop turner. Probably shouldn't have cut my interfacing so short, but now I know. As I always tell you, I'm always learning, so next time I will not shorten that much on the shoulder seam. So now I'm gonna grab the elastic as I explained, and I'm gonna pull it through here with the loop turner. My loop turner is damaged, but hopefully I can still work with it. So once I have this side aligned, don't forget that we have 1 centimeter seam allowance on each side, so this is perfect. So I'm gonna pin here. Now I'm gonna pull the rest of the elastic until it reaches the other edge, which I will do in a second. Oh, some people do this with the safety pin, and sometimes I also use the safety pin, but today I really went for the loop turner, and probably it wasn't the greatest idea, but I still want to do it. I don't want to start all over, so here it is. So I align the edge here also, and I also place a pin on this edge. And now, as I told you, straight stitch, securing the elastic on one side and on the other. As you can see, this is the rush that I'm gonna have on the lower part of my sleeve, so the gather on the lower part. It's not a lot. If you wanted more, remember that my first sleeve, I adjusted the pattern on the first dress and I made this longer so I had more gather. So this is with the original pattern, and remember we changed a little bit the sleeve. This is the effect that you will have, at least for my shoulder size, bicep. Okay, so then just to imagine it's going to look like this. Okay, so now I'm gonna do the same with the other elastic on the other side. I'm gonna sew them in place, and then I'm gonna come back and explain you the next step. So the elastic is sewn, and we are now gonna place right sides facing together of our main fabric. So align the right sides of our main fabric, align the sleeve under the arm, and align the side here. It helped me a lot, the tape that I used for the neckline and also for the seams. It really helped making the fabric not deform and not stretch where I didn't want it to stretch, so it's really helpful. So now I'm going to sew from one edge to the other, but of course we have our lining here in the middle, so we must stop when we reach here, and we must probably I'm going to take a little bit, I don't know, some stitches here. I don't know if I gain. No, I'm going to go ahead and do zigzag here and here, and then I'm going to do a straight stitch here and here, and then I will care about the lining. Then I will do the lining. Okay, so for now just sew these two together, aligning the edges and making sure that they are perfectly aligned so the finish looks good. Okay, here and here. So as you can see, I did a zigzag and then I did a straight stitch. Okay, from here I came all the way down here. I must take out this one, and with the seams facing this side, and then when I came on this side I moved these seams to the other side and I came until here. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out of the way, and I'm going to place these two aligned facing together the sides, and I'm going to sew them together just like we did now. Okay, of course you have to make sure that you move the sleeve out of the way, and when you sew them together, of course you have to be very careful. That's why I didn't use my overlock, because I want to be very precise. I'm going to reach here, and I'm going to do the entire sewing until the end here, right sides facing together, and this will be ready. If you want, you can use your overlock here instead of what I did with the zigzag and the straight stitch, but for me, to be more accurate, I really prefer doing this this way. So to show you in detail before I reverse this to the right side, I usually this one no, but usually I flatten my darts so they are open and they look nice. Okay, and I came all the way until I reached the seam, because when I reverse this to the right side, I want this to be very good, with a very good finish. And the same here. And now I'm just going to trim a little bit the excess fabrics that I have here, not a lot, but just a little bit, and the threads also, and then I'm going to reverse this to the right side, and we have the main top ready. This is a bit similar to the tutorial that I made for the 𝗱𝗲𝗀 pattern, for the bodysuit, where I created a top underneath the main body, but this is actually also different, so I don't know. I think you will like it, at least I do. Oh, I love this sleeve. Okay, so now we have here the top completely ready and finished, and I'm going to show you under the arm. So you can see that under the arm it looks very good. Okay, so we now need to start sewing the layers here. And so we will sew the first layer. This is the first one. By doing something very simple, I'm going to pull the tail until I have the size of my top here on the first top layer, top tier. So I'm gonna pull until I really have found the size that I want. So you pull the first tail. Of course you have to distribute this evenly, or it will look strange, but nevertheless it's never like completely exact because it's very hard to, but it's still, if you do it carefully, it will look nice. This is rolling again. I would love to do a tape here just to stabilize this, but I don't have any more available, so I'm not going to because I don't have available. If I had, I would. And what we will do once this is all with the same size is we will place this like so, and we will align. Of course you have to find your seam. You have one seam here in the middle. Wait, let me go back. Okay, now let's first mark the middle. So if we fold the fabric, it's the best way. I'm gonna fold like so. So here is one of the opposite side of my seam allowance. And then if we fold this again, we have two more points as a reference for our gathering. So I mark these 4 places because I think it will be easier for me to distribute and to align this with the top. I'm going to align the seam on the side. You may decide to do it on the back, but I'm gonna align it on the side. So this means this one here will stay on the middle of the top, this one here in the middle of the back, and this one here on this side of the top. And so the other thing I can do is mark half of my front and half of my back, and I will just fold the fabric, or not, because this is so curly. My God. So this is the middle. Ta-da! I also need the middle for this one. So this is something that it's easier if we do previously, but I didn't remember that we need to do this. Okay, middle. And now the same for the back. Oh, for the back it's easy because I already have this one, but let me check. So seam with seam. And probably I improvised the center seam that I had to do. No, but it's in the center. Okay. Okay, now that I've marked the places on my top, it's much easier for me to place this here. So now this will be the process for all the tiers. So I'm going to explain once, and I'm also going to explain the second one. But then if you want to add more, as I told you, I'm going to have two tiers only. You will continue adding until you finish your pattern. So what I'm going to do here is, once I have this marked, and I can also be smart and mark the opposite sides. And I also can do something even better, which is using a pen that can be erased with my iron, which is much easier than pins. So I'm going to remove my pins and I'm going to mark the fabric. And I'm going to mark on the bottom part also, and also mark the other tier, so that we are sure that we will align all the pieces properly. Okay, so now I'm going to stop filming because you don't need to see me doing this, but go ahead and mark your fabrics. So I have sewn the lower part of the top together, so it's much easier for me now to connect this one with this one. So if we have this one on the right side, and we want to align the side seam with the side seam, we can simply insert this inside here. We will align the side. I'm gonna pin. Now I'm going to align the center. I'm gonna align the other side with the other side. And the back with the back. And this means I have 4 points of reference. So let me just move this. Okay, so this means now that all this excess fabric that I have here, just like we did on the sleeve, we need to pull the tail until we have the same amount of fabric than we have on the main top on this tier. And once we have that between the two pins, it will be pinned and ready to sew, just like we did on our sleeves. So let me try and see if I can grab the tail. So this is what we need to do. Distribute this evenly along the line that we need to sew. Pin. Do this for all the areas around where we have just prepared with the pins and the lines. And once this is done, we can do a zigzag first. I always do zigzag first, and I'm going to tell you why. Sometimes the overlock machine flattens the fabric so much that I actually lose my brush almost, because it flattens so much. It's impossible. I really don't like it. So I always do first a zigzag, and once the zigzag has really secured the layer, the tier to the main piece, then I go to my overlock and I use the overlock to sew all together. But before that, always zigzag. So let's repeat this for all the areas, just like I told you. So 4 times, okay? And then we will zigzag, and then we will overlock. We now have our top with the first tier. I attached the first tier to the main piece only with the zigzag, but in a few minutes when I sew the second tier, I will go and I will use a straight stitch all along the edge here, or I will do an overlock all around this seam here, and then 1 centimeter from the edge I will do a straight stitch, and this will make sure that this seam will be completely finished. So now we are missing the last tier. In my case, this is my last tier. I have already remember that we did the seam, the lower seam. Well, we overlocked, we folded, and we did a stitch very near the fold and the edge. And remember, I told you that we have two options regarding the finish. We can now trim this with a small scissor and then fold again and again do a stitch like this one, and we will have the finish like I showed you from the other dress. Or honestly, I'm thinking on leaving it exactly how it is, because I think it will work and it will it's a nice finish. I like the finish, so I think I will leave it as it is. But if you want, just cut, fold and sew again very near the edge. I have marked this layer also, of course, with the middle and everything, just like we did before. And now if I align this on the reverse side, just like we did for the other one, and I include this inside here, right? Now I can align the sides of my top, which in this case is the seam, the side seam. So I can align the side seam here. Now the effect that you want will depend on your taste. So how much you pull for the tails to create the rush effect will completely depend on your taste, okay? But now for now I'm just making sure that I have aligned middle with middle, side with sides for both fabrics. And once you do that on the 4 points that we have marked, center front, center back and sides, it's the same that we have done before. So we just need to pull the tail and make sure that the two fabrics will have the exact same measurements when we sew them with our zigzag. And so now this will completely depend on you, as I told you. So pull the tail on both fabrics until you have them with the same size and until you feel like it's completely as you like. That's what I'm gonna do. And I will fast forward so you don't have to watch me doing all this slowly. So to explain you what I did, I first pulled the threads and pulled the fabric on one of the layers, in this case on my outer layer, until I measured more or less from the middle, and I folded to see if they were even, so the same amount of size on this side and this side, and I did the same on the other side. And now it's the easy part where you just need to do exactly the same on the second fabric, making sure that it's aligned with the first one that you rushed, that you created this effect. Pin, and then we will just go ahead and do the zigzag, and it will be okay. And then of course we can do, as I was telling you, we can also do a zigzag and then overlock and then do a straight stitch 1 centimeter from the edge to make sure that the seam is completely perfect. So I did just like I told you, I overlocked and then I did a straight stitch 1 centimeter from the edge, and I did the same on this one. Now we just need to trim all the threads that we may have here, like this one, and our dress is ready. I'm gonna put it on, I'm gonna take some pictures to share with you guys. I still want to tell you that there may be another thing that you want to do. This is completely up to you. That is including an elastic under the bust. So for instance, and we can also flatten this seam towards the back and sew with a straight stitch here on the edge, just to make it stay completely flat instead of being like this. So this is something we can do. And the other thing I was telling you was, if you want, you can also add an elastic under the bust. So for instance, I tried this on yesterday when I was preparing to sew the other, before we sew the final tier, and I felt that under the bust maybe it's a little bit too loose. So if I want, I can add an elastic, and I can do this after this is ready. So I just measure my under the bust, I place my elastic under my bust, I stretch just a little bit, and then you can sew the elastic here. How? Very easy. Imagine that we have the elastic. I'm gonna find one. So imagine we have the elastic, and the elastic will be a little bit smaller than this. What I'm gonna do is, imagine it is like this. It's not so small. The adjustment here is just a little bit, so the different, if you want to add it, it will not be a lot, but okay, imagine like this. What I would do is I would sew the elastic together, and then I would mark one edge, and I would mark the middle, and I would align, I would stretch it while I was sewing it to this seam, and I would stretch it until my marking was aligned with the center of the dress and the back of the dress, okay, and then the side with the side. So the stretch would be just a little bit, and I think I'm gonna actually do that. But first I'm gonna try it on without the elastic, and then I'm gonna add the elastic.